Welcome to a very special championship edition of the Heron Outlet. He is Austin Robillard, she is Alex Winley, I am Ian Heston. Well, it's only a championship edition because Inter Miami went out and won the whole thing. The League's Cup champions, their first title, their first trophy, their first piece of hardware in club history. Inter Miami, your 2023 inaugural League's Cup champions as they defeat Nashville in exhilarating fashion, 10-9 on penalties, and that's where we begin. Inter Miami finally hoisting some hardware, and just a month after Messi, Busquets arrive, wow, has this moved fast, and has this all come to fruition, guys? What an exciting episode we have for today, and just let's start there. Let's start with the excitement of this weekend, of that win, or, of that penalty win. Drake Callender, wow, just from the game himself was absolutely phenomenal. Messi scores a wonder goal to give Miami the lead. Nashville comes back to tie it. It goes to penalties. Inter Miami with a chance to win. Victor Ulloa, the most capped player in Inter Miami history, one of two guys who's been there since day one, the other being Drake Callender, steps up to take the penalty that would have given Miami the win. He gets denied. It goes on and on and on until we finally get to the keepers. Drake Callender, who has never taken a penalty in a competitive match in his entire life, gets up there, roofs it, upper 90, right into the back of the net, and then comes up with a huge save that gives Inter Miami its first title, its first trophy, and what a night it was. Let's start there, Alex, with you, and just what that feeling, what went through your mind when Drake makes that penalty, when he saves it, and now Inter Miami with their first star to the club's crest name.
Yeah, I think I was more shocked at how well the penalty was taken. A lot of goalkeepers are unusually good at penalties. So with Drake, I was genuinely shocked that number one, that he made it, and number two, that it was well taken and unsavable. So I think that was my first thought. And then when Nashville's keeper went up to take the other penalty after that, I think I was just worried that he'd make it, and then the round of penalties would have to continue on and start over again. Every penalty that was taken, it felt, the pressure was, oh yeah, the pressure was on them. But Drake kind of alleviated a lot of that with his saves. I think he saved one on Randall Leal earlier, number one, and then he came up big in the end, scoring the game-winning penalty and saving the penalty that would have continued to tie the game, really. So kudos to Drake. Like you said, Ian, he's one of the OGs, and he's been there since the beginning alongside Victor Ulloa and Robbie Robinson as well. He was the first draft pick in club history. So great for those guys, seeing it Inter Miami through the good and the bad. And now they've got their first, excuse me, piece of silverware, and it must feel good for sure.
Yeah, it was. I was there at the stadium when it happened, and I don't think that Inter Miami supporters left until about 12:30 a.m. local time in Nashville. I mean, they were there, hours after, making sure that they didn't leave until every single Inter Miami player or anybody in the staff had walked off the pitch. They were there to celebrate the entire time. Even let fireworks off outside the stadium as well as I was catching my lift back to the hotel. Like, it was just it was something that you could tell took time to achieve, and they were super proud of. And I am very happy for everybody who stuck it out with this team, and had the belief that someday this would happen, and they trusted the ownership groups who absolutely delivered on their promises. It's a little weird, though, getting a trophy mid-season, because in about 30 minutes, we're going to go ahead and talk about FC Cincinnati in a semifinal in a totally different competition. So that for me is still like a weird thing that I'm having to deal with. But at the same time, it's been quite the ride. It's been a journey for sure, especially since 2019, 2020.
Austin, you were there,
I'm happy for all the supporters of the fan base.
And what was the environment like? La Familia showed up in a phenomenal fashion, I thought, especially for, the amount that tickets were going for, the loopholes and everything that had to go on with that game. What was the environment like? How did La Familia show out? And what did it feel like in the stands when you all are celebrating in Nashville's home park, the first ever trophy?
Well, Let me start off by saying if you were on Broadway, you weren't turning a corner without seeing pink. Like, I think that before the match, up and down the street of Broadway, you saw Inter Miami jerseys not necessarily everywhere, but it was very often that you saw somebody wearing pink or paying homage to the away side. So you could tell right in the beginning, by noon in Nashville that there were going to be a good number of fans there. I even saw Michelle Kaufman had met up with Vice City and posted things. So they were all over the city and then obviously making their way towards the game. They had a whole section pretty much filled up and one upper deck. There were 3 other sections that Inter Miami had ticket allotments for that were giving them the season ticket holders. So they showed up in good numbers. But I will say the Nashville crowd, it wasn't like the Dallas crowd. It was more like the Philadelphia crowd that was, going ahead and being ruthless against Miami as they should have been. It wasn't that, easygoing, messy chants in the crowd all the time that you heard through the TV when they were playing Dallas. It was mostly a Nashville crowd, which of course is expected, but they really brought a good environment. The energy through every section of the stadium was felt. It was something that a final should be. That's what I will say. I think it was one of the better MLS environments that I had ever been in. I can't think of anything that much better other than maybe an Orlando Miami game where it's just crazy like that too. But this was something that you could tell both sides really wanted. And when it came to the on-the-field stuff, we'll get to in a second.
As we get into the game here,
say
held Miami to just one goal.
Like the middle parts of the game, but when it got to the end, everything was getting a little crazy.
Messi is inevitable, as we know.
The tension
but he does get on the score sheet yet again. That being the only time that Miami was able to get on the score sheet this game, and something different that they had to. Probably the best defense that they've gone up against. But we cannot go anywhere without discussing Drake Callender. He was phenomenal against Philadelphia. He was phenomenal, even more phenomenal, I would say, against Nashville. Just absolutely. I know Messi won player of the tournament and the Golden Boot. Drake Callender won goalkeeper of the tournament. 1A and 1B, honestly, because the Inter Miami does not do any of this without either of them. And to think, of Drake Callender, I was thinking back to when we first got to know Drake and the ride that he's been on. He had just graduated. I don't even know if he had specifically graduated college at that point in 2019. He was close to graduating from the University of California, and he's always been a Cali kid. So he graduates from Cal Berkeley in 2019, was already in the San Jose Earthquake system. And at the time, if you were in MLS circles discussing it, he was thought of, but not like this. And so this has been definitely a rise for him throughout the years to see him, acquired for the 27th pick in the MLS Super Draft and $150,000 in general allocation money, which looks like one of the best trades Miami has ever done now. Get signed as a homegrown player, which, we've talked about at length here, is so valuable, is immediately on the bench, actually the third stringer behind Luis Robles to start. Eventually, John McCarthy comes in. He gets the starting nod. Drake still is the number 2. Finally, Drake gets his chance, but then Nick Marsman gets signed. So Phil Neville goes back and forth over the course of 2022 with him and Nick Marsman. And Drake ultimately gets nominated for goalkeeper of the year, one of the 3. And really in this offseason has just shown the growth that he has gotten, not only as a keeper, but also as a leader on this team. Gets called into the U.S. men's national team on a couple of occasions now, has not appeared yet for them. And all of this leading to this moment, his rise to stardom, to look at the Instagram followers that he immediately got. All of this, the attention that is being paid for him with such a humble guy who has really done things the right way every step of the way through his professional career here. It's extremely nice to see. And to further it, just a bow on that point, Alex, as I turn it over to you, is what was the criticism that we always gave Drake? It was his footwork. It was his distribution. And for him to score a game-winning penalty, to come up with the save, because we know he's a great shot stopper, but to come up with the game-winning penalty, making it with his feet, is something that I never thought I'd see, and just a really nice bow on that, and a really nice coda to what has been a tremendous career and now an unforgettable career with Inter Miami.
Yeah, and adding on to that, even in the game when Miami are playing out of the back and trying to evade pressure, Drake's gotten better with his feet as a whole. In summation, he's comfortable playing out the back. He can ping those little knuckleballs towards either Jordi Alba or Messi or excuse me, DeAndre Yedlin or the center forward, whoever's playing, whether it's Joseph or Campana at the time. He looks much more comfortable on the ball and distributing with his feet. And I know, like you said, Ian, there were times in the past where we all kind of held our breaths when Drake got the ball. He's always been a great shot stopper, but with his feet, he's always been a little iffy. But now you see the progression, and I think kudos to the goalkeeping coach at Inter Miami, Sebastian Saha, who I believe Drake kind of gave like a celebratory post on his Instagram regarding that and giving him the credit to how much he's improved on that. My Inter Miami's coaching staff has definitely helped him in that regard, and he's grown from last season where I remember against Austin FC away where Miami lost 5-1, and I remember there was this one goal that Austin scored where Drake came out of his box far too early, and it was basically an open goal for Austin, and I think that was a low point for Drake. But he didn't let that stop him, and he just continued to get better. And he has this phenomenal mindset where he's very even keel, and tranquil, and he does a lot of yoga exercises, and he's very connected to himself and grounding. And Ian, you mentioned that on your Twitter account after the game. DeAndre Yedlin and Drake were doing their grounding. What is it, like an exercise or a grounding procedure after the match where they walk around barefoot and just kind of soak it in and calm themselves. But yeah, Drake has been absolutely huge, and in hindsight, I believe correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I believe Drake signed a new contract earlier this season. So yeah, and I say that because it's sooner rather than later that European teams are going to come knocking because Drake's still only 25, 26, and goalkeepers nowadays play until 40. So Inter Miami do potentially have their long-term goalkeeper, but then again, you don't want to have his career, not stunted, but you want him to flourish, and hopefully one day he'll be able to get to Europe. But as of right now, he's still an Inter Miami player, and he just won the club's first trophy. So happy to have him here.
I mean, going back to what we talked so much about Drake just being one of the best keepers in MLS since he stepped foot onto the pitch, and it's kind of like now, and this is, I guess, some part of the Messi effect, is that everyone gets to recognize it. I know he was nominated for Goalkeeper of the Year last year and probably got a couple nods, and people started to notice he got the call up to the U.S. men's national team. But after that final, you look at Drake and, on the biggest stage that he's had in his professional career, pull off a performance with 5 saves, the winning penalty kick, and the winning save. That just puts a cherry on top of it all. And I think going forward, he's going to be a household name in MLS, especially from the goalkeeper standing. You look at what New England just did in selling their keeper to Chelsea, Matt Turner a couple of years ago, Gaga last year with Chicago. So Drake could be the next name on that list. Now, it's not, he wasn't as young as Gaga was when he was sold, but at the same time, you look at who New England just sold and the age there, and you look at when Matt Turner was sold. So I think that Alex has a really good point, and it's something that Miami are going to have to monitor over the coming years. However, that new deal is going to be extremely important. I mean, we talked about Nick Marsman a lot on this show, and the value for that contract. And with goalkeepers in MLS, it's kind of better to find value for your money. So depending on what that deal was that they got the extension for, maybe it's more worth it to, keep Drake as a goalkeeper for the future rather than bring in a couple $1 million for him to send him off to Europe. But that's a decision up to the player and to
the rework deal, $355,000
because
a
this
year
guy's
for a keeper.
His profile is
for one of the best keepers. If not,
I don't know how many
that is a phenomenal deal that Miami currently has, and that's a renegotiated deal. I wouldn't, that's one that was just signed. He was on, I think it was 90 last year, because he was still under homegrown, allocation. Yeah. And just, it is so nice for someone who has been such a great ambassador for the club to get this recognition, I think, right now, that we're all in agreement on that. Someone who I think also deserves a ton of praise, especially for how they played in the semifinal and the final, is Sergei Krivtsov. I think Sergei has had a phenomenal run of form here. Miami has been under pressure defensively. The argument has been made that the offense can now carry this team, which I can't believe I say that every single time that I do because of the history of Inter Miami and trying to score goals. But the defense has been the ones that have gotten I guess the lion's share of the criticism, and Sergei has really stepped up to that challenge, not just defensively where he's been pretty stalwart, but also offensively. We saw with the first 2 goals against Philadelphia, he was vital in both of them. Also was tremendous in his distribution against Nashville, and for him to really be flourishing, and Kamal Miller to another extent too. I think that Kamal sort of has a different responsibility than Sergei does under this current system. But for Sergei to really be flourishing like this, let's just touch on it for a sec, because I think that we haven't really paid attention to the defense or the guys around what has been happening. And Sergei has done tremendous in getting Miami here and providing for the offense as well, Austin.
Yeah, I think that, there were some moments throughout the course of this tournament that, you pointed to the defense, especially in the Dallas game. A lot of that was the midfield, but it seemed like it took them a little bit of time to figure out what needed to happen and what that balance needed to look like between the block in front of the center backs and in the center backs themselves, and how to play alongside guys like Busquets and Arroyo, and who's going to drop in at certain times and what ways they're going to defend. And I think, for the most part of this match, because Nashville gave up so much of the ball and Miami kind of played into that, you saw a very solid back line that was able to press high. And we know that Kamal Miller and especially Sergei Kristov aren't the fastest of the bunch. And when you're not able to be the fastest guys on the field and you have to defend in transition, positioning is where it really comes into play. And I think that throughout this match, up until the latter parts of the game, because it got a little bit stretched out, but I thought they did really well to mitigate a lot of those Nashville attacks and kind of slow down what Nashville wanted to do, which was attack in transition after Miami had, a lot of the possession, and kind of relegate them to set pieces where they ended up scoring their goal, but holding up the play and kind of making sure that they didn't let anybody in behind. Like, I didn't see Surridge and Mukhtar up until about the 65th, 70th minute get in behind. So you saw a very solid defensive performance from Miami. And of course, being on the ball a lot obviously helps because you're not giving up, the potential. But at the same time, I think that it still requires a lot of IQ from veteran center backs like Sergei Kristov is to be able to be in positions to know where you can't get beat. And Sergei Kristov can't let himself get beat. Now, I definitely want to mention that first goal in the Philadelphia game, his pass over the top to Joseph was just a phenomenal read. Watching Gazdag move over to Busquets, watching Messi have 2-3 defenders on him, and Joseph make that run in between the center backs, to be able to pick that out, not only from a reading standpoint, but from a quality standpoint to make the pass. If you can see that develop throughout the course of the year as well, while they try to make MLS playoffs.
The second goal was exactly the same. I mean, the second goal, he makes the same pass. Martinez just turns to the inside really instead of turning to the outside. So you're spot on with that. Alex, I guess my question, though, is, there's only 2 clean sheets throughout the entire tournament for this team. They had the 4-0 against Atlanta, the 4-0 against Charlotte, but they did concede in every other game. So how do we measure the good and the bad from Kristov, from Kamal Miller, from DeAndre Yedlin, etc.?
I know a lot of criticisms regarding this new look Miami is, their defense is poor, but, a lot of the Leagues Cups games, Miller and Kristov, they managed to keep clean sheets. And I know the opposition attack probably wasn't as strong as like a Philly or Nashville, but they still managed to keep clean sheets, and they managed to keep Philly to just 1 goal in regulation. They beat Charlotte by 4-0, and they kept that clean sheet. Again, against Orlando, they gave up 1 goal, but, after that, they didn't really threaten much. But, I know that's considered a weakness for this top-heavy Miami side, but I think Kristov and Miller have been getting it done. And I do want to shout out Sergei a lot because he's a really good progressive passer, and I remember doing a scouting report on him before he, when he signed, that, he's going to be able to be that extra, sort of like a deep lying midfielder in a sense, but he's playing as like a center back in the sense that he's just good at passing out of the back. Him and Kamal Miller, I think, they're very good ball playing center backs. Yes, they're a little bit slow at times, but for Sergey, for instance, his positioning makes up for a lot of that. And I remember, like Austin was saying, I think Nashville they were able to break at least once, and I remember it was Mukhtar on Miller. I don't know what minute it was, or Kamal slipped, and I thought that was it. Where Nashville were going to score there, and it's going to be 2-1, and then they're going to go on, and Miami were going to have to push for another goal. But back to Drake Callender, he came up with a huge save, and similarly, back to Kamal Miller and Sergei Krivstov, they did a good job at hustling back and kind of disrupting the two Nashville attackers, Mukhtar and Sam Surridge. So kudos to them. Like I said, they're not the quickest, but they both, internationals for their country, Canada and Ukraine. They're both, Sergey's got Champions League experience. He's won multiple trophies. So, he's equally as experienced as some of the new guys that they brought in. Obviously not as decorated as Messi, Busquets, and Alba, but Sergey has had his experience, and he's played well for, Shakhtar when he was playing in Ukraine, and he's won trophies in his own right. So it was no real shocker that he was able to play that well and be that center back
the big criticism there,
presence that Miami needs,
was the case, I guess, as we continue this defensive conversation, the criticism that came from the national game, also from the Philadelphia game, is the second half didn't look as good as the first half. And Inter Miami in this tournament really did a phenomenal job of really pouncing on teams early, outscoring teams 12-2 in the first half. But if you look at the second half, that number drops to 10-6. And so there's a little bit more of an even balance there. And if you take Atlanta out of that, it looks even worse. So I wonder if Gary Smith had touched on this in the postgame, which I found very interesting in his presser. As I was listening, he had a lot of praise for Miami, but he also made a point to say, okay, we've now seen them for 6 or 7 games. They have some tendencies that we're starting to figure out. And Tata Martino has said this as such. He also said in his postgame presser that, guys are tired because they haven't rotated really anybody. They threw out the same lineup. They threw out the same system pretty much the whole tournament. And so I guess I wonder, with Jim Curtin really being able to figure that out in the second half, Miami was already up 3-0 at that point. So the game was kind of done by halftime. And Nashville in that second half looked probably the stronger team. Is there something that is happening that teams are starting to figure out what this Miami team is doing, and it's going to take a Messi wonder goal like this to stay ahead? It seems like if Inter Miami concedes one goal, then the offense is good enough to at least get a result out of that. But as teams begin to see this more and more, we haven't seen Facundo Farias yet. We haven't seen Thomas Alvarez yet. We've seen a little bit of Diego Gomez. So there are still wrinkles that can be put in here. I guess I'm just wondering how the different rotations are going to start to need to be implemented as we're looking towards the rest of this season and then trying to make a run towards the playoffs, if that's even possible.
Well, I want to touch on the first point that you made about the kind of the style that Gary Smith put out, and him talking about the kind of ways to find out who Miami are and how to approach a match, especially of that magnitude in a final. I will say this, when it comes to Nashville versus any of the other teams that Miami played throughout this tournament, I think Nashville's 100%. Style of play, clearly, because it was their toughest match other than maybe the Dallas game, Nashville's style of play was the best suited to go against this Miami side. It was defend in a block of 8, sometimes even 10, and you saw 10 people behind the ball at most points. I actually, Ian, would say that Nashville were probably the better side for about 70 minutes in this one, other than when the goal first happened up until Messi hit the post at the last half of the game. I thought that Nashville played a better all-around match just because of the fact that they were able to consolidate Miami to not breaking them at all. Miami did not break down the back line. They didn't get balls in. Jordi Alba didn't complete any crosses. No balls were getting inserted into the 18-yard box for Nashville. It's exactly what they would have wanted. If it wasn't for Messi somehow beating Walker Zimmerman after getting his entire foot on the ball and then swirling a shot past 3 defenders that were closing in on him, this game could be very, very different. And I think Nashville deserve a lot of credit for what they did, and I do have concerns now, and this is, it's so weird to have this trophy come at this point in the season because we're at an all-time high, and all of a sudden now I have to worry about an Open Cup semifinal where I'm like, well, did Miami get found out? Did Miami go up against an opponent that really knew what they were supposed to do? I would say absolutely yes, but how are other teams going to emulate that? And I think about Cincinnati, and I think about everything off the field, a smaller market team, a great home crowd that are a competitive team in MLS right now, but they don't have the same exact style as Nashville. They're not the team to stay in a low block and only work on the counter. They've got some of the best attackers in the league, bar none, with Luciano Costa and Brandon Vasquez and some other signings that they've brought in as well. I am curious to see how other teams will now adapt to Inter Miami, because even if Miami score that one goal and you say that, yes, Miami are going to get one on a game-to-game basis, if the other team can go ahead and get one too, that's not enough for them to make the MLS playoffs, because ties really, they don't have a lot of room for error. So I have a lot of concerns about that kind of stuff, and I think that you will see Tata Martino start to tweak some things because this was a tournament, and I think that he played the tournament correct. I think Tata Martino did very well over the course of 7 games to make adjustments. We saw it with the midfield from the Charlotte game to the Philly game to the Nashville game. We saw different adjustments between Arroyo and Busquets, Kremeshki, Gomez, all of that and the like. And I think that now when you get to the semifinal on Wednesday and then all the way to the MLS games starting on Saturday, adjustments will have to be made because it's not going to be tournament style play. It's going to be league play, and other teams are going to have to make adjustments. And whether those adjustments are what Nashville did or what another team like Dallas did, but scoring and going on the front foot too, it's going to be something to watch. And I'm not necessarily concerned because obviously Messi is on the team, but I do think that there are going to be questions asked of certain players and this system, and they're going to have to deliver.
Yeah. And to your point, Austin, I think there were a lot of discussions about Messi resting. And I don't think that's going to happen until, like you said, we get to leagues play. I think US Open Cup is too important for the team. They feel it's too important for Messi to take a rest. And even then, Messi's playing style isn't something that where he needs rest. Half the time he's walking around on the field, but that's to his advantage to scope out the opposition. And I don't know if you saw that viral video going around where he was literally walking around for about a minute until he went and scored that opening goal for Miami against Nashville. But yeah, I think when it comes to leagues play, I don't, I'm going to be honest and say against the Red Bulls, I can see maybe Messi sitting for the first 45. And if Miami need a goal or something, Tata will bring him on. Messi is still 36 and played a lot of soccer. Same thing with Jordi Alba and Busquets. If there's anyone that will probably get switched out, it's maybe Noah Allen for Jordi Alba. Jordi's been, he's been running a lot and defending a lot. So if there's anyone that does need rest, it is Jordi Alba. And I think people will understand if he's sat for a couple of games because his position is so demanding. And Noah Allen will do a really good job. So I'm not worried about that. But yeah, against Cincinnati, I fully expect the big three to start and do their best. Cincinnati, they'll be without a couple of their top players. I'm reading a couple of tweets from Cincinnati beat writers. They'll be out without their star center back due to injury. So that's, advantage to Miami. And similarly, Cincinnati, they lost against Columbus 3-0. So their confidence heading into the U.S. Open matchup will kind of be low, and they'll obviously be looking for a win. But they're kind of in a weird form space at the moment. So in regards to rest, yeah, I think Messi will probably be rotated.
Tata did reflect that as much in his remarks on Monday, saying that he, unless Messi comes to him and says he can't play, then he will be in the starting lineup. And I think you're spot on there, Alex, that probably against New York, that's the first time where we'll probably see a rotation start to get in, because if you do that, then now you've given him, 10 days off, right? So, from Cincinnati to no, it'll be a whole week, right? Because they have Nashville at home the week after in that Wednesday game, because there's basically double game weeks the rest of the way. So at least a whole week off that you'd give in that time frame. But you had mentioned let's start talking about Cincinnati and this Open Cup semifinal, which from before all of this with Leagues Cup happening, we thought was the most important thing. We have been talking since January and February that the best way for Miami to get into CONCACAF Champions League at the time, now CONCACAF Champions Cup, was to go out and win the U.S. Open Cup. They performed. They got through by the skin of their teeth a couple of times. Survived scares from lower division sides, Birmingham, Miami FC, etc. And were able to get to this point in the semifinal, really on the backs of a Phil Neville team that had done it previously, and then with Javi Morales, now the assistant coach, as the interim coach back then. I wonder how much, let's talk about this for a little bit. How much does the importance of the U.S. Open Cup now change? Because Inter Miami is now in CONCACAF Champions Cup next year. They will be in the 2024 edition. They need to win that to get into the Club World Cup in 2025, which is the ultimate goal for this team, to get on the global stage like that. But they've already qualified not only for that, but also get a bye into the round of 16. By winning this, you don't have to play in the opening round of the tournament. So they've already qualified for next year's Champions League as far as they can possibly qualify. It can't get any better for them than where they already are. What now then is the importance of the Open Cup, which is the longest running professional cup tournament in America, a huge deal in the U.S. soccer community for them to win it. Their rivals, Orlando, won it last year to be able to take it off them, to be able to get their second trophy and get a double off a season that looked, lost at times, really in May and April especially. What now is the importance of the U.S. Open Cup? Is it still the preeminent thing that we were talking about 2-3 months ago, or is it, a little, well, it'd be nice if there's a cherry on top here?
Well, the reason why we were so adamant about this team winning Open Cup was because it was the shortest route to getting into the Champions Cup, Champions League, whatever you want to call it. And I think that when you enter the Leagues Cup in the summer and you don't know if Lionel Messi is going to join this team, you say, oh, having to win 7 games rather than just win the 2 or 3 that they had to for US Open Cup. Yeah, obviously your focus is going to be there. And now that they've completed that, the question is definitely a valid one. But at the same time, I think about the intrigue of more trophies and more silverware for Inter Miami and what, the owners will probably demand of this team. If you're 2 games away from winning another trophy, nobody in that ownership group or front office or even the coaching staff are going to say, no, don't go for it. And I think that that's what you see a lot of times when you enter this stage of this competition. Earlier on in this competition, I mean, Phil Neville had even talked about it earlier on in the year. It's like where you get to test out certain players and things like that. And then when you get to these quarterfinal, semifinal kind of things, you're not taking it lightly at all. And so despite already qualifying for the farthest you could in Champions Cup for 2024, it's still another piece of silverware they can add with Lionel Messi on the roster. That in and of itself is self-explanatory, but I think that the ownership is going to be demanding everything they possibly can from this organization from here on out, given the quality that they showed over the last 7 games in Leagues Cup. So it's hard to see that this would be the one that they choose to rest in. I think Tata Martino did say that it wouldn't be this one, but it's not as pretty and as glorious because they've already qualified, but at the same time, to bring in another trophy in 1 month's time after doing it in the previous month that's enough for me.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add on here, but I agree. I think it'll be cool to to see them add another trophy in. I think the finals in late September, and if Miami end up hosting that,
Yeah, so
I believe Jorge Mas said this on the
I'll
record.
touch on that for a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think that
Stadium,
listen, the prestige of the U.S. Open Cup is bar none. This is the preeminent cup tournament in the United States and has been. I'm looking back. I think it was Bethlehem Steel. I was trying to look it up while you were finishing. The Brooklyn Field Club, 1913 was the first time this thing has been continuously played and only was not played because of the pandemic for a couple of years. So it is a very prestigious competition. Perhaps a little easier because it's only American teams that can compete in it. We thought that Liga MX was going to put up a little bit more of a fight, but this was the inaugural Leagues Cup for that tournament. the Open Cup comes with the history and all of that. That I think in and of itself deserves the respect and the ambition to go out and get. Inter Miami will take on Cincinnati at TQL Stadium on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Immediately following that game is the other semifinal between RSL Real Salt Lake and the Houston Dynamo. The winner of those games will play in the final. So it's very simple in how it'll go for hosting the final. We're just going to say for Miami purposes, if Miami wins and Real Salt Lake wins, the game is in Utah at Real Salt Lake. They determine the host site. If Houston wins that game, Miami would host that game, in which case Jorge Mas has yes, like you had said, and I've reported for months, considered moving that game to Hard Rock Stadium. That would be the one and only game this year, at the very least, that they would move to Hard Rock Stadium, that being on September 27th. It's a Wednesday for the final on that. So I also, just a quick side note on that. The Charlotte game that it needs to be rescheduled now that was missed on Sunday because of making the Leagues Cup final, that also game will be rescheduled depending on what happens to Miami on Wednesday. If they miss, it'll be one date. If they lose, it'll be a different date. I posted on Twitter. I can put a link as well. I forget the dates right now off the top of my head. Anyway, back to my point. No, I think it is the 27th if they lose, and I think it's the 13th of September if they win.
One of them was one of them October 14th.
Because that's the only Wednesday. There's two Wednesdays that they possibly have available to reschedule with Charlotte not having a game that same day. Yes, the league is league calendar is very congested the rest of the way, which continues into this conversation. You have a Cincinnati team that just played their first MLS game and got absolutely trounced by their in-state rivals, Columbus Crew, and didn't look particularly competitive. 3-0 in Columbus will definitely be on their minds. That is a game that matters a lot to them. But, they did have 16 days off. Once they were eliminated by Nashville in the Leagues Cup, they didn't have a game. They played some scrimmages, but that was really it. And we heard earlier today, that Musquera, their star center back, will not be in the lineup for them. You've seen that Acosta came back, and Brandon Vasquez. They also have the brand new Gabonese striker, Aaron Bupenza. Sorry, I want to make sure I got that right. He got into the lineup, didn't go a full 90 for them. But Austin, you had mentioned that the style of Cincinnati that maybe plays into Miami's hands a little well in this game. They are not known for being necessarily a fantastic defensive team. Even if they are a good defensive team, they are without their best defender. And so that almost puts the auspices on them to go out and attack even more. And we could see a Dallas-like game in this. I wonder, Miami was – I remember I talked with a couple guys after that Dallas game, and they were upset. I mean, they were very upset with how they played that game defensively. Angry. And they felt that should never happen. And you saw immediately their response in Charlotte, only allowing one goal to Philadelphia, only allowing one goal to Nashville. They took that Dallas performance defensively to heart. And so I wonder if that's playing into Miami's hands a little too much. I know that they have, wonderful strikers, probably one of the best strikers in MLS in Brandon Vasquez. But I wonder if that plays into Miami's hands a little here.
It's hard to look at what happened in the semifinal, what happened in the final, and say, okay, no, we don't need to make adjustments as an opposing team, because clearly when you look at what Philadelphia and Jim Curtin did versus what Gary Smith with Nashville did, you need to keep the Miami players outside of the 18 and congest that area and don't let them get in behind. That is the key to stopping Miami at this point. Giving up a Messi goal, account for it on the tally sheet, and find a way to get a goal yourself later on. I think that, honestly, other than Hani Mukhtar, Sam Surge starting, which was kind of a question for Nashville. We didn't know if he was going to start, and he had obviously done really well in his 3 appearances off the bench, scoring 3 goals. That was still a new kind of connection that Nashville are building. Meanwhile, you look at Luciano Acosta and Brandon Vasquez, are one of the best connections in MLS over the last 2 seasons. And so I think that they can back themselves to break down Miami's defense at some point and get a goal, whether it's through transitional play or off of a set piece that Miami have been susceptible to be giving up over the course of this tournament as well. So this past tournament anyway. And I think, I think Cincinnati will have to change some things. You look back at the performance that they put on against Miami. I think it was in April, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was a very tightly contested game. I think it was just 1-0 and shots were pretty even as well. So you look at that kind of game and the amount of possession that Cincinnati gave up, and that's kind of where I think that they need to lie with this one is say, yeah, we understand that we're not going to be the perpetrators and going after this game because it's a little bit too risky. Let's work this week, and since the hell is real derby, let's work and figure out if we can let another team control possession and defend on our own, and meanwhile take our chances when they come, and instead of forcing the issue. And I think that's what a team in a tournament is going to especially want to do, but Alex, in leagues play, I think other teams will do that as well.
I'm just thinking about that game that Austin was talking about earlier in the season, the 1-0 defeat in Cincinnati as well. Mascaro scored the goal in that game.
Yeah.
But it was that sort of, we've talked a lot about, but pre-Messi, about Inter Miami's road goal scoring woes, especially in MLS play, was almost non-existent. Accounting for that goal, let's just talk tactically. If they come out with that 3-4-1-2 that we've seen Cincinnati sort of adapt in recent times, that almost operates as like a 5-3-2 or a 5-2-5-3-2-1. How they're going to shift that midfield in terms of Busquets, in terms of Arroyo, in terms of Kremashki. Where does the auspices lie on them to figure out where they're not going to have numbers, but are going to need to have that quick transitional style against Cincinnati?
Yeah, and I think watching the game against Columbus yesterday, I believe that they had a lot of okay. Well, I'll say that Columbus, they really pinned Cincinnati in their own half a lot and kind of had the lion's share of possession. So I think Inter Miami will do something similar like they've always been doing during Leagues Cup and whatnot. I think they'll look to control the ball and limit the opportunities that Vasquez and Luciano Acosta will have. And I think once Miami are able to pin Cincinnati back in their own half, I don't want to say they'll have trouble breaking, but, they don't necessarily play with wingers. They play with wing backs. So if Miami can stymie the two wing backs and kind of limit everything going up the middle from Acosta and Brandon Vasquez, and on top of that, control possession in Cincinnati's final third for long periods of time, I think that I think Miami will have a better shot than what people are saying. I know Cincinnati are top of the league right now, and they're a great team, but, Miami, look at the game against Nashville. I think, Miami were the favorites, but Nashville still played pretty well. And Miami were only able to draw the game in regulation and just win on penalties. So I think against Cincinnati, it'll be similar. And that
Cincinnati have not lost at home in 2023. Their last loss was October 1st of 2022. So just goes to show the type of team that they are at home. Guys, let's talk as we wrap up the show here, though, that Inter Miami will have a game back in MLS play this weekend at New York Red Bulls. We touched on a little bit earlier whether or not we think Messi and Busquets and Alba will play in that game. But it does bring MLS action, brings back the crazy reality that this is currently a last place club. They are rock bottom in the MLS, in the Eastern Conference especially, sitting on 18 points from 22 games, 5 wins, 3 draws, 14 losses on the year. They did get, now is the time that right now they sit 14 points out of the final playoff spot with 12 games for them to play. There are some games in hand on everybody else. They did get a little bit of help over the course of the weekend. Chicago lost. They are currently in the 9th place spot. New York City FC lost. They can jump them with the games in hand possible here. But they do sit a whopping 14 points back of the playoffs as they get going here in MLS play against a Red Bull side that is one of those teams sitting at 11 points better than Miami with 2 games in hand. These are the type of games that I know that they're going to go out with a rotational squad, or I assume that they are. But these are the type of games that they need to win, straight up win, if they're going to get back in the conversation. You have to beat a team like the 11th place Red Bulls. How important, given everything, I mean, I just made that point with the U.S. Open Cup, but let's say they go all out for the Open Cup on Wednesday. They've just gone through this whole tournament where they've won their first trophy. They play in a semifinal of the competition they were prioritizing, and now they're back in league play with basically a must-win. It's like, feels like every single one of these games are must-wins. At what point do you just take a breath and go, wait a minute, maybe it's not? Is this even one that you can do it for?
Mathematically speaking, you raise a really good point, Ian. I don't think so. I mean, with where New York stand in the table, you've got 2 games in hand on them. This is what they call one of those, like, quote unquote real 6-pointers, because I think that you're not getting to the playoffs. If you win 12 out of 12, fine. Then you chalk it up and say, great job, Miami, you're getting in. But at some point, they're going to need a little bit of help. And I think that they're going to really need to help themselves and pick certain matches. It's really good that they have 2 matches against Charlotte going forward, because they're right there. They've got the match against Red Bulls. They've got another match against New York City, another match against Toronto. They've got the match away to Atlanta coming up as well. So there are certain key games throughout the course of the next 12 matches in league play that they're definitely going to have to pick and say, this one makes more sense to actually go all out for. Thinking about it now, Red Bulls is one of those ones that you say, yeah, we should probably go for all 3 points. And I think that they should, unless they aren't too serious about playoffs, considering they have the chance at winning 2 other trophies. So or at least 1 more. They've already won 1. So I don't know. This is why I'm not on the coaching staff.
Yeah, it'll be a good matchup. I don't have much to say here, but yeah, I'm just intrigued, and especially just regarding rotation and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know. I think I just want, the injured guys and the younger players to be reintegrated. Jean Mata, he's back in training. Gregory's close. Franco Negri posted something on his Instagram where he's starting to bend that injured knee again. So, yeah, I'm just intrigued to see how Miami will handle that rotation after winning Leagues Cup and now going for the U.S. Open Cup final. I'm intrigued to see how Tata will
3
manage
separate
that,
competitions in the
Wednesday
course of a
will
week.
probably
You
be
lift
that
the
first
trophy
glimpse
on
of,
Saturday.
some of the
You
newer
play in a
players coming in,
semifinal on
maybe some of
Wednesday, and you're back to
older
last
injured
place
players,
by the next
reintegrating
Saturday.
into the squad.
It's definitely a wild time for Inter Miami, as they have now taken home their first trophy in a phenomenal game, winning the Leagues Cup 1-1, 10-9 in penalties. Congratulations to Messi, who gets another trophy to his illustrious career. Sergio Busquets, Jordi Alba, Tata Martino, and the OGs, right? The Drake Calendars, the Victor Uoas, the Robbie Robinsons, and even the most recent ones, the DeAndre Yedlins. It was so nice to see that the club had brought out, that Alex, you just mentioned the injured guys. So, able to celebrate in there was Nico Stefanelli, was Gregory, was Jean Mota, was Negri. To be able to celebrate all of that was truly special.
And Ian Frey walked out with David Beckham.
There you go. Ian Frey. There you go. Yeah. Big Coco, Nick Marsman, exactly.
Ian Frey had walked out with David Beckham. So that was a big one, yeah.
Oh, please,
yeah,
no.
He actually posted a photo. He posted a photo with ice on
Frey.
his other uninjured knee, so I think he was celebrating a little bit too hard and had to.
All right. Well, we will have coverage of Wednesday's game, 7 o'clock on Paramount
funny,
Plus.
But like scary.
So this game on Paramount Plus, Golazo Network, I believe.
Yeah.
And then back to MLS action this Saturday at the Red Bulls MLS season pass for that. We will have the whole coverage here on the Heron Outlet. You can follow us here. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give us a comment. And all that jazz. You can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. You also can subscribe to our Substack, theheronoutlet.substack.com, or if you're listening to us wherever you get your favorite podcasts, whether it be Spotify, Apple, Google Play, or YouTube Music, we got you covered here at the Heron Outlet. For our unbelievable producer, Andres, he is Austin Robillard. She is Alex Winley. I am Ian Hess. This is the Heron Outlet. We'll see you back here this time next week.